You've probably noticed something strange about learning. Two people can study the same material for the same amount of time, yet one walks away genuinely understanding it, while the other barely remembers anything at all. The difference isn't intelligence. It isn't talent. It's something far more fundamental. And once you understand it, learning becomes almost absurdly efficient. The traditional approach to learning is broken at its core. People sit with textbooks, read page after page, highlight sentences, reread chapters, and convince themselves they're making progress. They spend hours with material, yet when tested, they struggle. When asked to explain what they've learned, they stumble. The knowledge hasn't truly entered their minds. This happens because there's a profound misunderstanding about what learning actually is. People treat their brains like filing cabinets, believing that if they just push information in enough times, it'll stick. They equate exposure with understanding. They mistake recognition for knowledge. When they read something and it feels familiar, they think they've learned it. But familiarity is a deceptive feeling. Here's the real mechanism. The brain doesn't store information like a tape recorder. It builds models. It creates structures of understanding. And these structures are only built through a specific kind of mental activity that most people never engage in. Think about someone learning to play the piano. They could watch someone else play for 100 hours and memorize what it looks like. They could read books about proper technique and chord progressions, but until their own fingers touch the keys, until they struggle to make the sounds themselves, until they fail and correct and fail again, no real learning happens. The same principle applies to everything else. Yet somehow, people forget this when it comes to intellectual skills. The fundamental error is passive consumption. Reading is passive. Listening is passive. Watching demonstrations is passive. These activities feel productive because information is flowing past your consciousness, but the brain isn't doing the work that builds understanding. Real learning requires a completely different approach. It demands active reconstruction. Here's the principle. You haven't learned something until you can recreate it from nothing. Not recall it, not recognize it. When you see it, recreate it. Build it again in your mind without the original in front of you. This changes everything about how you study. Instead of reading a chapter 3 times, you read it once, close the book, and try to write out everything it said from memory. Not the words, the ideas, the structure, the relationships. What you can't reconstruct is what you haven't learned. Those are the gaps. Those are where you focus. When you do this, something remarkable happens. Your brain suddenly wakes up. It shifts from passive receiver to active participant. It starts asking questions it never asked before. Why does this connect to that? What happens if this changes? How does this fit with what was said earlier? These questions don't emerge during passive reading. They only surface when you're forced to rebuild the knowledge yourself. The textbook becomes a reference, not a script. You attempt to explain the concept on paper. You get stuck. You realize you don't actually understand something you thought you did. You go back to the source, find the specific piece you're missing, understand it properly this time, close the book again, and continue reconstructing. This is vastly more efficient than traditional study. You might spend 1 hour doing this versus 3 hours reading and rereading. Yet the 1 hour produces deeper, more permanent understanding. Why? Because you've done the cognitive work that actually builds knowledge structures. You've practiced the very thing you'll need to do when you use this knowledge later. Generate it from your own understanding. But there's a second principle that multiplies this effectiveness. You must work at the edge of your ability, not in the middle of it. The brain has a peculiar property. It only builds new structures when it encounters difficulty it can barely overcome. If something is too easy, the brain doesn't bother strengthening those pathways. It already has them. If something is too hard, the brain can't make progress and gives up. The sweet spot is right at the boundary where you're struggling but can push through. Most people avoid this zone. They practice what they already know because it feels good. They read material at their current level because it's comfortable. But this is like lifting the same light weight forever and wondering why you're not getting stronger. When you're learning a new mathematical technique, don't do 10 problems that are variations of the same thing. Do 1 or 2 to grasp the pattern, then immediately jump to problems that combine it with other techniques. Make yourself uncomfortable. Get stuck. Figure out why you're stuck. That's where learning happens. When you're reading a difficult technical book, don't reread the same section until it feels comfortable. Read it once carefully, then force yourself to explain it. The discomfort of not being able to explain it properly is the signal you're at the right difficulty level. The effort to push through that discomfort is what builds understanding. The human brain evolved to learn most efficiently through problem solving, not through passive absorption. For thousands of years, learning meant figuring out how to make fire, track animals, predict weather, craft tools. These were all active processes. You couldn't learn them by watching. You had to do them, fail, adjust, and try again. Academic learning is relatively new in human history, and it often violates these natural learning mechanisms, but the brain hasn't changed. It still learns best through active struggle with problems at the edge of its current capability. Here's the third principle. Understanding must be built from the bottom up, not from the top down. People often try to learn complex things by memorizing high-level summaries or final conclusions. They want the elegant equation without understanding what the symbols mean. They want the sophisticated theorem without grasping the simple cases it builds from. This is backwards. Real understanding is always constructed from fundamentals. You need to know what the pieces are before you can see how they fit together. You need to understand the simple cases before the complex ones make sense. This seems obvious, yet people constantly violate it because they're in a hurry. When you encounter something you don't understand, trace it backwards. What simpler thing does this depend on? Do you truly understand that simpler thing, or did you just memorize it? Can you explain it without looking at notes? If not, you found your actual starting point. Begin there. This might mean going back to basics you thought you already knew. That's fine. Better to spend an hour truly understanding a fundamental concept than weeks building a shaky structure on top of a misunderstood foundation. There's something else that happens when you build from fundamentals. You develop the ability to figure things out rather than just remember them. If you understand the basic principles deeply, you can derive more complex results when you need them. You're not dependent on memory. You're working from understanding. This leads to the fourth principle. Explanation is the ultimate test. The physicist Enrico Fermi had a habit that revealed his deep understanding. When he learned something new, he would immediately try to explain it to someone else in the simplest possible terms. If he couldn't make it simple, he knew he didn't really understand it yet. This is a perfect diagnostic tool. Can you explain the concept to someone who doesn't already know it? Can you use an analogy that captures the essential idea? Can you answer questions about it without having to consult your notes? The act of explaining forces you to clarify your own thinking. You can't hide behind technical jargon when you're explaining to a novice. You have to understand what's really happening, not just what the textbook says is happening. Try this with everything you learn. After studying a topic, pretend you're teaching it to someone and speak out loud if you need to. Write it out as if for a letter. When you get stuck or realize your explanation is unclear, that's valuable information. That's exactly where your understanding is weak. This also creates another beneficial effect. It shows you the difference between knowing something and knowing about something. You might know about quantum mechanics, that it exists, that it's strange, that particles behave oddly, but you don't know quantum mechanics unless you can work through the actual mathematics, explain the principles, predict outcomes of experiments. The distinction matters immensely. Now let's talk about the deeper mechanism behind all of this. The brain creates knowledge through a process of building and testing mental models. A mental model is a simplified representation of how something works. When you truly understand something, you have a working model in your mind that you can run like a simulation. For instance, when you understand how a lever works, you have a mental model of forces, pivot points, and distances. You can imagine moving the pivot and predict what happens to the effort needed. You don't need to memorize specific examples. You can generate new examples from your model. These models are built through active engagement. When you passively read about levers, you might form a vague impression, but you don't build the model. When you try to solve problems about levers, when you make predictions and check if they're right, when you get confused and have to reconsider your assumptions, that's when the model gets built and refined. The key insight is that mental models are built through error correction. Your brain makes a prediction based on its current understanding. Reality provides feedback. If there's a mismatch, your brain adjusts the model. This cycle only happens when you're actively using your understanding, not when you're passively receiving information. This is why practice problems are so much more valuable than worked examples. Watching someone else solve a problem doesn't engage your prediction and correction mechanisms. Solving it yourself does. Even when you get it wrong, especially when you get it wrong, you're forcing your brain to adjust its models, and the same applies to memory. People think they have bad memories when really they just haven't encoded information properly. Memory isn't about strength of repetition. It's about depth of processing and number of connections. When you actively reconstruct information, when you explain it in your own words, when you connect it to other knowledge, you're creating multiple pathways to that information. Later, retrieval becomes easy because there are many routes to reach it. When you simply reread the same text, you create only one shallow pathway that's easily lost. Let's make this concrete with some scenarios. Suppose you're learning calculus. The traditional approach: read about derivatives, watch your professor work examples, copy down formulas, practice similar problems until you can do them smoothly. The result? You can do textbook problems, but panic when faced with anything slightly different. The better approach: read the basic concept once, close the book, try to explain what a derivative means without mathematical notation. Just the idea. Can't do it? Open the book, find what you missed, close it again, try to explain it better. Once you can do that, try to figure out how you'd calculate a simple derivative from first principles. Get stuck, check the book for just that piece, close it, try again, then solve one simple problem. Now try to predict what would happen in a more complex situation before looking at how it's done. Make the prediction specific, check if you're right. If not, figure out where your mental model was wrong. Adjust it. Try another prediction. This feels slower initially, but you're building genuine understanding. 2 weeks later, you'll still know how derivatives work. You'll be able to tackle novel problems because you understand the underlying principles, not just the procedures. Or suppose you're learning history. The traditional approach: read chapters, highlight important dates and events, make timeline notes, reread before the test. The result: you can recognize names and dates but couldn't explain the actual flow of cause and effect. The better approach: read about a historical period, close the book, try to write out the narrative in your own words. What happened and why? What were the actual causes, not just the temporal sequence? Get stuck on the connections, go back to find them, close the book, continue, then ask yourself questions the book didn't ask. Why did this happen in this place and not elsewhere? What had to be true for these events to unfold this way? What would have happened if one factor were different? When you force yourself to think through these counterfactuals, you build a much richer model of the historical dynamics. Or consider learning a technical skill like programming. The traditional approach: follow tutorials step by step, typing what the instructor types, getting working results, feeling like you're learning. The result? You can't write code without a reference. You don't understand why things work. You panic when something breaks. The better approach: read what a programming concept does, close the tutorial. Try to write code using that concept without looking. It won't work. Figure out why. Look up just that one thing you need. Try again. Get it working. Now try to use it in a different way you haven't seen. Force yourself to adapt, not just copy. The pattern is the same across all domains. Active reconstruction, working at the edge of ability, building from fundamentals, testing through explanation, and developing working mental models. There's a final element that ties this together: patience with the process and trust in the struggle. Learning done right feels harder than passive study. You get stuck more often. You feel uncertain more frequently. This discomfort makes people abandon the method and return to the familiar comfort of reading and rereading. They mistake the comfortable feeling of recognition for the substance of learning. But the discomfort is the point. That feeling of struggle, that sense of reaching for something just beyond your grasp, that's the sensation of your brain building new structures. When it feels too easy, you're not learning. When it feels impossible, you've jumped too far ahead. When it feels difficult but achievable, you're exactly where you need to be. The human mind is extraordinarily capable of learning. It's been doing so for hundreds of thousands of years, solving problems far more complex than most academic subjects. It knows how to learn. You just have to work with its natural mechanisms instead of against them. The next time you need to learn something, try this different approach. Don't read it multiple times. Read it once with full attention, Then close the source and actively work with the material. Reconstruct it, explain it, test yourself, not with recognition but with generation. Work at the edge of what you can do. Build from the bottom up. Create mental models through prediction and correction. It might feel strange at first, you'll be uncomfortable, but you'll learn more in 1 hour than you previously learned in 3. The knowledge will be deeper, more flexible, more permanent. You'll understand it, not just know about it. And that's the difference between appearing to study and actually learning. One is passive consumption that feels productive but builds nothing lasting. The other is active construction that feels difficult but creates genuine understanding. The choice, as always, is yours.